Once we have created the graphical interface of the application, the next step is to implement the business logic. We're going to stop the execution of the application and we're going to go to the code of this page, that is to say, to the main page.xaml file. As part of the code behind, we're going to proceed to declare the different variables we need to perform the calculation of the bill division with tip included. For this, we need, first of all, the total of the bill. We also need to know the percentage that we're going to tip and, finally, the number of people that we're going to initialize in 1, which is the minimum number of people that is needed to carry out this calculation. Let's take care, first of all, to carry out the first operation, which is to obtain the total account from the graphical interface. To do this, we're going to go to the main page.xaml file and we're going to look for the control in which we can enter the total of the account, which in this case is a control called txtbill. We need to be notified when we have finished entering the account total. And you may remember that an entry control has an event called complete, which let us know when the text has finished being entered. Once we have created the event handler, we go to the code behind and we already have this definition of the event handler, in which we're going to indicate that the bill field is going to be equal to, let's carry out a conversion through decimal.parse. Let's read what is in the control txtbill.text. We place the semicolon and then we're going to invoke a method called calculateTotal, which we have not yet created. We're going to proceed to define it so that we do not have any type of problem, and for the moment we're going to leave it empty. This method is going to serve us to carry out the operations once we have all the data. At this very moment, we have just obtained the total of the account. The second step is to obtain the amount of percentage that we are leaving as a tip. To know this data, we can use the slider control that we have defined to know the percentage of the tip. As part of the slider, we will proceed to define the value change event. We're going to create the event handler, and in the code behind, let's indicate that we want to assign to the tip field the value equal to int. Let's make a conversion to an integer type of the sldtip.value property. Later, we're going to show the user what this data is through lvltip, which is a control that we have already defined previously in the graphical interface. We're going to assign in the text property, which is the amount of tip that we have chosen, so we use an interpolated string to establish this string. We're going to invoke once again the calculateTotal method. At this point, we already have the total bill and also the percentage of tip we are leaving. With this implementation, we can move the slider and notice how in the left part the percentage is updated automatically. The next task is that we can move the slider when one of the buttons we see at the top is pressed, which are the ones that allow us to quickly set a percentage of the tip. How can we do this? Let's go back to the XAML file, let's find the buttons. I'm going to proceed to define a clicked event that we saw earlier. I'm going to proceed to create a new event handler. The thing with these buttons is that in order not to be writing an event handler for each one of them, we can carry out the obtaining of the control that is invoking the event handler. Obtain the text of the button, removing the percentage symbol to obtain what is the percentage that indicates the button. Knowing this, let's indicate that we want to use the same button clicked event handler for each of the events. Once we have done this, let's proceed to go to the code behind, and as part of the event handler, let's first make sure that who is sending this event is a button element. Once we make sure of this, let's do a conversion to the button type so we can access its specific properties. Next, let's create a variable called percentage, which is equal, and let's get the text of the button through btn.text. Let's replace the percentage symbol with an empty string, and in this way we will get the button text, which is actually the percentage value. Finally, let's indicate SLD tip in its value property to be equal to percentage. Let's see the application with this change. Let's press one of the buttons and see how it has automatically updated the value of the slider according to the button that has been selected. The next step is to define the event handlers for the buttons that allow us to add more people to the account. To perform this action, let's locate the control that we created in a customized way from 3 controls. And let's indicate that for the button called btn-, we want to create an event handler for the clicked event. And let's do the same for the last button, which is the one called btn+. Let's create an event handler for the clicked event and proceed to implement them. For the case of the event handler of the minus button, to subtract people, we must make sure that the number of people is not less than 1, since it is logical to think that there cannot be an account if a person has not consumed some type of food. Then we're going to indicate no persons minus minus, in case this is true, and later we're going to indicate LVL no persons dot text, and we're going to assign the value of no persons to this label. Finally, let's invoke once again the method called calculateTotal to carry out the recalculation once the number of persons of the account distribution has been decreased. And in the case of the event handling for the button that increments persons, let's indicate no persons plus plus semicolon, and let's assign once again to the label LVL no persons the value of the field no persons. Subsequently, we're going to invoke once again the method called calculateTotal to carry out the calculation of the repartition. Finally, we're going to address this method that we have not yet coded, which is the calculateTotal method, and we're going to carry out a series of operations that will allow us to obtain the repartition of the account. In first place, we're going to define what is the total of the tip, and for it let's declare a new variable that is called total tip, that is equal to, and we're going to indicate that we want to multiply the bill by the percentage that is being left as tip on 100. The next data that we're going to obtain is the amount of tip for each one of the people. For it, we're going to declare a new variable called tip by person, that is equal to total tip, that is the data that we obtained in the previous line. We're going to divide this data by the number of people. Once we have this data, we're going to assign it to the label called LVL tip by person in its text property. We're going to use an interpolated string, and we're going to indicate that we want to place the data tip by person :C, so that the conversion is made to a currency format. Subsequently, we're going to obtain the subtotal, which is a data that we must show in the graphical interface. For this, we're going to declare a new variable called subtotal, which is equal to the total of the account, and we're going to divide it by the number of people. Let's assign the result to LVL subtotal.text, again as an interpolated string with a currency format. Finally, let's get the total amount to be paid by each person, and to do this, let's declare a new variable called total by person, which is equal to, and let's perform an operation to add the amount of the bill plus total by tip, and divide the result by the number of people. Finally, let's assign the result to LVL total.text, and again as an interpolated string. Once we have written the code with the calculation to perform the different operations, let's test the application. We can now see the application in action. Let's proceed to enter some value to see that it works correctly. Let's try with a value 200. We see that it is being displayed in the label control. Let's select a tip percentage, for example 10%. The slider automatically moves to the value 10, and the total tip per person is recalculated. We see that the subtotal shows us the amount to be paid by each person, and the percentage shows us what is the total in currency format of the tip. Finally, we're going to test the functionality of this control, and we see that in a satisfactory way it is dividing the whole amount between two people. We can then test the application. It is now fully functional and we have created from scratch.